Voting is the most violent act someone can commit in their lifetime. This little noted anomaly about voting is directly related to the idea that the state derives its authority from the consent of the governed. The aura of legitimacy surrounding the actions of the state is enhanced by the perceived role of voting as an expression of the so-called will of the people. Whether non-threatening or violent, the authority for each and every one of the actions of the state is presumed to flow from the consent of the people through the process of voting. School children are taught this from a very early age. The idea that the state derives its powers from the consent of the people sounds romantic. Few people, however, are aware that, by definition, the state's power is for the specific purpose of engaging in acts of violence. After all, no person or organization requires a grant of power in order to act peacefully. This is no secret among scholars, and the following definition of the state, provided by sociologist Max Weber, is considered one of the most authoritative. A state is a human institution that claims the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. The state is considered the sole source of the right to use violence. Through the legitimizing impact of voting on the state's exercise of power, voters become intimately involved in the use of that power. This means that non-voters tend to delegitimize the state and its claim to be exercising power as an expression of the will of the people. So if no one or very few people voted, the state could not profess to be empowered to act as an agent of the people's will. Without the protective cover provided by voters, the state would have no pretense to act as anything more than a gang of thugs. The actions of the state and the voters who legitimize them are linked together, and voters are at the minimum spiritually involved in every act engaged in by the state, including all violent acts. This involvement in the state's violence isn't tempered by the otherwise peaceful day-to-day life of a voter. Through the act of voting, a person integrates the violence of the state into their life. This is true for people who did not vote for a winning candidate as well as for those who did. It is even true for those who voted for candidates who were explicitly against the particular policies of a winning candidate. What legitimizes the state to act in their name is not who or what they vote for. It is the participation in the motions of an election. It is the act of voting itself. This means that the violence perpetrated by any one person pales in comparison to that which is authorized to be inflicted through the state in the name of those who vote. The combined ghoulish violence of every serial killer in American history cannot match the violence of even one of the violent actions committed by the state as the people's representative. A prominent example of this are the economic sanctions imposed in Iraq after the Gulf War in 1991. These sanctions prevented Iraq from rebuilding its destroyed sanitation, water, and electrical power infrastructure that had been specifically targeted and destroyed by the US military. Supported and enforced by the United States, these sanctions were credited by UNICEF and other organizations with contributing to the gruesome deaths of an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 children every month for over 8.5 years. All voters share in the state's contribution to the needless deaths of these children caused by disease and starvation. Over 500,000 innocent children in Iraq perished in the years after the First Gulf War, and the hands of every voter in the United States are covered in their blood. The same dynamic of voter responsibility for state atrocities is true of the many hundreds of civilian deaths caused by the bombing of cities in Yugoslavia in 1999. This was a small-scale recreation of the atomic bombing of the non-military cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hundreds of thousands of innocent women, children, and old people were killed through the initial bomb blasts and the long-term effects of radiation exposure. Those bombings had been preceded by the US military's killing of many hundreds of thousands of civilians during the fire bombings of Tokyo, Hamburg, Dresden, and Berlin. All of those people were killed in the name of voters by the Roosevelt administration, which they had elected in 1944 by a landslide. Voting, like a long-range missile fired at an unseen target many miles away, is a clean method of participating in the most horrific violence imaginable. So declining to vote does much more than cause a statistical entry on the non-voting side of a ledger. It is a positive way for a person to reduce their moral responsibility for acts of violence engaged in by the state, acts which they would never engage in personally, and that they do not want to be committed in their name as voters. Non-voting is a public expression of the depth of respect a person has for the sanctity of life, and that violence can only be justified in self-defense. The daily interactions between most people is notable for the level of peaceful cooperation that normally prevails. The vast majority of people strive to better their lives by working together with other people in the pursuit of their common goals. This community spirit of non-violent cooperation is supported by non-voting, and it stands in sharp contrast to the societal violence endorsed through the ritual of voting.